Hello, and welcome to my presentation on racial discrimination in rural and urban communities. My name is Latondra Richardson. Racial discrimination occurs in both rural and urban areas. It is an American problem as well as an international problem. The definition of racial discrimination is when an individual is subjected to unequal treatment because of their actual or perceived race and their birthplace. Individuals who are racially discriminated are excluded or isolated from a number of settings, including employment, housing, education, and other public resources. Racial discrimination brings inequality in settings such as housing, employment, cultural appropriation, education, healthcare system, criminal justice system, the media, and social media, the juvenile detention center, as well as the American government itself. America has a long history of hate crimes. Racial discrimination sometimes results in hate crimes and the deaths of innocent minorities due to ignorance and fear. Inserted below are examples of some of the many hate crimes that have taken place over the years in America. Inserted to the right is a picture of a married couple and African American psychologist named Kenneth and Mame Clark. They are influential because they help to expose that racial discrimination gave birth to white bias. Their research experiment named Emotional Factors in Racial Identification and Preference in Negro Children exposed that by the age of 5, black children are aware that to be black in America is to be born inferior, and that African American children internalize racism, and as a result, they exhibit signs of self-hatred. This was this was concluded based on the research with two dolls that are identical in every way except for race. The children was asked many questions such as who is the nicest one, who would you want to play with, and 90% of all the children picked the lighter skin or the white doll over the darker skin, the black doll. The experiment showed a clear preference for the white doll among all children regardless of their race and their background. Symptoms of racial discrimination in rural settings. Poor mental health is a symptom of racial discrimination. Now, poor mental health is a symptom of racial discrimination in both urban and rural settings. However, poor mental health is more detrimental in people of color in rural settings due to the lack of mental health facilities as well as the increased isolation that people in rural settings have due to their environment and the space of their land. Symptoms of racial discrimination in urban settings. Colorism is a symptom of racial discrimination that is more impacted in urban settings than in rural settings. That is not to say that colorism does not exist in rural settings. It's just that it is more detrimental in urban settings due to the mainstream popularization of Hollywood fads, the latest fashion trends, and the overall culture and atmosphere of urban settings. Colorism is a product of racism and racial discrimination that oppose the white standards of beauty and allows lighter skin tone minority members to have certain privileges that darker skin tone people do not have access to. These privileges are similar to, but is not white privilege. It's similar to white privilege and to pretty girl privilege. And an example of the privilege that lighter skin tone minority members have that darker skin tone people do not have is that they have more representation in movies and on media outlets and social media than darker skin tone people. And the lack of representation can result in psychological and emotional problems, as we've seen earlier, where black children were were feeling self-hatred towards themselves in Kenneth and Mamie Clark experiment. Today, minority members have more privileges and access to programs than they did 10 years ago. However, racial discrimination still exists today in various forms of organization. For example, redlining still exists, and redlining is when mortgage companies suppress minority populations from receiving home loans to buy homes in neighborhoods that are homogeneous, higher socioeconomic status community there are, and gentrification exists where minority members are forced out of their home due to rent increase in order to attract homogeneous population of higher socioeconomic status. Another way racial discrimination exists is through employment because gender pay is still not equal. Appropriation is when the majority culture can profit off of other cultures and get higher pay than the originating culture. And what I mean by that is, for example, when Addison Rae, this TikTok famous star, was able to go on talk shows and dance dances that she did not create, and she got paid for that. Meanwhile, the creator of the dances get no recognition or no screen time. Racial discrimination exists in education because public schools are underfunded, understaffed, and they are underrepresented. Represented. Inserted below are more ways that racial discrimination still exists in today's world. For example, the criminal justice system, we see that there are more Latinx and Hispanic and African American men and women in prison than white people. I already talked about the media and the social media, how racial discrimination shows a lack of diversity among minority members. And in the juvenile detention centers, it's very similar to the prison system, where our youth have more people of color going straight from school into detention in juvenile centers. And in the American government, there are certain legislations and policies that do more harm towards and for minority members than good. For example, the shutting down of mental health facilities in Chicago, Illinois. They shut down over half of the mental health facilities in Chicago, Illinois, and that increased the amount of people who were sent to jail due to substance on drug charges, substance abuse charges. A theoretical framework that can help alleviate the struggles and racial discrimination minority members feel is behaviorism. And behaviorism supports the notion that a person is not born racist, but is instead racism is taught. Behaviorism is created by John B. Watson. Inserted below are two charts that deals with race and percentages. The chart on the left is significant because it shows that the white people, who is the majority culture, are decreasing, and by year 2060 the percentage of white people will drastically decrease, whereas the other races such as Hispanics and Latinx, African American, Asian American are increasing. And the reason because of this is because there are more biracial and multiracial couples producing children. And on the right is poverty rate. And in this chart, it shows that while white people are the majority race, it is the minority race that has the highest poverty rate in America. Something that is related to both urban and rural minority members is the racial biases and stereotypes. Regardless of the location, these minority members are labeled with the same stereotypes and racial biases. For example, in the Hispanic and Latinx community, they are labeled lazy. They're falsely labeled lazy and uneducated, whereas the African Americans are labeled violence prone and welfare dependent. Like I said, both of these are false labels, but they are stereotypes that is attached to their race, and both settings have to deal with these negative images. There are a host amount of policies and programs that address racial discrimination. The ones inserted below are the ones that deal with racial discrimination in the Huntsville/Alabama area. And these three will be National Cares Mentoring Movement, Southern Poverty Law Center, and ACLU, which is the abbreviation of the American Civil Liberties Union of Alabama. Further below is a policy plan that President Biden recently issued, and this is an executive order number 13985, and basically in this order the responsibility to improve the communities that have been historically underserved is given to the federal government. And another policy plan that President Biden has pushed is the foreign policy vision that addresses systematic racism, and his hope is to strengthen democracy. What I really like about the National Cares Mentoring Movement is that their target group is children who are underperforming in school. And these children are often the children that are sent to juvenile detention centers. So I appreciate that they are working to keep these children in school and out of the prison system, out of the juvie system, and that they're giving them more one-on-one attention instead of in pushing them into a even more problematic setting. Something I feel is a weakness in President Biden's executive order is that there is no detailed plan for the federal government as they pursue a comprehensive approach towards advancing equity. And what I mean by that is that we're not giving the time frame that the federal government has to advance minority rights. Recommendations for changes in the urban and rural communities. My first recommendation is that we should push for a multi-million-dollar bail for people who perform hate crimes. And that is to ensure that they are not able to leave prison or jail before their trial. And I believe that they should be punished with more severe jail time, meaning that they should be punished with for life jail sentences when they commit hate crimes. Another thing I recommend is that the large wealth gap among the majority race and the minority race be decreased. And ways that this can happen is to produce more programs and policies that help help minority members to own and successfully run businesses and to become financially literate and understand things such as stock, real estate, and just asset building in general. And the third recommendation I have is that mental health facilities should be reopened and the funding that has been going towards prison should be redirected into mental health facilities. Discuss the advocacy plan. The advocacy plan to combat against racial discrimination is to eradicate discriminatory policies and practices while creating a path toward racial and ethnic equity. A organization that has been doing a really great job advocating for the end of racial discrimination is a organization called Council Office of Racial Equity. And what they do is research and design legislation to help improve the lives of minorities. The duty social workers have when it concerns racial discrimination is to address the effect of racism, social injustice, colorism, and systematic oppression. Social workers cannot afford to say mantras such as "I don't see color" because it hurts diversity and inclusion efforts. Because when you don't see color, you're also allowing yourself to be blinded to the oppression that people of color face due to their skin tone. So social workers must educate themselves to see color but not judge people based on their skin color, as well as take the responsibility to confront all forms of racism, whether on behalf of their clients or civilians.